The twin sons of Ashara Prime beat down on the medical station with relentless fury, turning the sand into sheets of burning glass. Sienna Cross wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist, careful not to contaminate her gloves as she finished stitching up a colonist's laceration. The small outpost served as the only medical facility for 300 miles, a stubborn human presence on a planet that seemed determined to kill anything soft enough to bleed. Through the translucent walls of the treatment tent, she could see the shimmer of heat rising from the desert floor. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the war between the Terran coalition and the Dravok Empire continued its slow burn, a conflict that had lasted so long most people forgot what started it. Sienna had stopped caring about the politics years ago. Her job was simple: keep people alive regardless of which flag they saluted. The comm unit on her belt crackled to life. Medical station, this is Watchtower 7. We have a situation. Sienna pressed the button, already moving toward her emergency pack. Go ahead, 7. Unidentified craft went down approximately 6 clicks northeast of your position. Trajectory suggests it was trying to reach your station before losing power. Scans show Dravok hull signature but no active weapons systems. Proceed with extreme caution. Her heart rate kicked up a notch. Dravok vessels rarely traveled this far into Terran territory without hostile intent. Copy that. I'm grabbing supplies and heading out. Send backup if you can spare it. Negative on backup. Sandstorm rolling in from the west. You have maybe 2 hours before visibility drops to 0. Your call, document. Sienna looked at her medical assistant, a young man named Felix who had arrived on planet just 3 weeks ago. His eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. I should go alone, she said, making it a statement rather than a question. With respect, that's insane, Felix replied. Dravok forces could be waiting. This could be a trap. Or it could be survivors who need help. She shouldered her pack, checking that her portable medical scanner was charged. If I'm not back in 3 hours, seal the station and wait for the storm to pass. Don't come looking for me. She didn't wait for his response. The desert consumed her the moment she stepped outside the climate-controlled tent, heat pressing against her skin like a physical weight. Sienna climbed into the medical rover, a battered vehicle that had seen better decades, and punched in the coordinates. The engine coughed twice before roaring to life. The landscape rushed past in shades of amber and rust. Ancient riverbeds cut through the sand like scars, evidence of a time when Ashara Prime had known water. Now it knew only dust and violence. The crashed ship appeared as a dark smudge against the horizon, growing larger as she approached. Smoke still curled from the wreckage. The vessel had torn a gouge through the desert, leaving a trail of scattered debris and scorched earth. It was smaller than she expected, more of a transport than a warship. The hull bore the distinctive crimson markings of the Dravok Empire, but something about the design seemed off. This wasn't a military craft. Sienna parked the rover 50 meters away and approached on foot, medical scanner held in front of her like a shield. The device pinged softly, detecting life signs. 3 of them. Small. Moving weakly. She climbed through a rupture in the hull, ducking under twisted metal. The interior was dark and filled with the acrid smell of burnt wiring and something else. Something organic and sharp, like ozone mixed with cinnamon. Emergency lights flickered, casting red shadows across the corridor. The life signs led her to what looked like a cargo hold. At its center sat a large containment pod, its surface covered in intricate Dravok symbols that seemed to pulse with faint bioluminescence. One side had cracked open during the crash, revealing the contents within. 3 creatures lay tangled together in a nest of thermal padding. Dragons. Juvenile dragons, to be precise. Each no larger than a house cat, their scales gleaming in shades of bronze, silver, and deep violet. Their wings were folded tight against their bodies, membranes thin enough to show the delicate bone structure underneath. One of them, the bronze-colored juvenile, lifted its head and fixed her with eyes that burned like molten copper. It hissed, a sound full of fear and fury. Smoke curled from its nostrils. Sienna froze, her medical training warring with her survival instinct. Everyone knew about Dravok dragons. They were the Empire's most prized weapons, raised from birth in war nurseries where they learned to hate humans with the same intensity they learned to fly. These juveniles would have been shown countless images of human soldiers, taught that every member of her species represented treachery and weakness. The medical scanner confirmed what her eyes already told her. Severe dehydration. Thermal shock from the pod's damaged heating system. Possible internal injuries from the crash. Without immediate treatment, they would die within hours. The bronze dragon tried to stand, legs shaking with the effort. It managed 3 steps toward her before collapsing, a small sound of distress escaping its throat. The other 2 juveniles, the silver and violet ones, tried to crawl closer to their companion but lacked the strength. Sienna made her decision. She set down her scanner and opened her medical pack, moving slowly and deliberately. "I know you hate me," she said softly, though she doubted they understood human speech. "I know everything you've been taught says I'm your enemy. But right now, I'm the only chance you have." The bronze dragon watched her with those burning eyes as she approached. When she reached out, it snapped at her hand, teeth clicking together an inch from her fingers. The effort exhausted it, and its head sagged back to the floor. She slipped a thermal blanket around the small body, feeling the fever heat radiating through its scales. The dragon's heart hammered against her palm, fast and irregular. Too fast. She lifted it carefully, cradling it against her chest. The creature tensed, a low rumble building in its throat, but it lacked the energy to struggle. The silver dragon tried to bite her ankle as she reached for it. "I get it," she murmured. "I really do." She wrapped it in a second blanket and tucked it under her arm. The violet one, the smallest of the 3, simply stared at her with eyes that held more exhaustion than hatred. Getting all 3 dragons and her medical equipment back to the rover required 2 trips. By the time she secured them in the vehicle's climate-controlled rear compartment, the first whispers of the approaching sandstorm had begun to darken the western sky. The dragons lay in a heap of thermal blankets, their breathing shallow and rapid. Sienna drove faster than was probably wise, the rover bouncing over dunes and rocks. Through the rear camera, she could see the bronze dragon lift its head occasionally, staring at her through the partition with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not just hatred. Something more complex. Confusion, perhaps. Or the beginning of a question it didn't know how to ask. The medical station appeared like a mirage through the thickening dust. Felix rushed out to help her, his eyes going wide when he saw what she carried. "Are those what I think they are? Help me get them inside. We don't have much time." They set up a treatment area in the isolation ward, a section of the station designed for contagious patients. Sienna worked with the focused efficiency that came from years of emergency medicine. 4 lines for fluids. Cooling pads to bring down their core temperatures gradually. Her scanner revealed hairline fractures in 2 of the dragon's ribs, likely from being thrown around during the crash. The bronze dragon, despite its weakened state, watched her every movement. When she inserted the 4-needle into the soft tissue of its foreleg, it made a sound that was almost a whimper. She found herself stroking the ridge between its eyes, the scales there smooth and warm under her fingers. "I know it hurts. I'm sorry. But this will help." The dragon's eyes slowly closed, whether from exhaustion or something else, she couldn't tell. Felix hovered in the doorway. "The Dravok military is going to come looking for these things. When they find out we have them, then we'll deal with it when it happens." Sienna checked the 4 drip rates, making minor adjustments. "Right now, these juveniles need medical care. That's what we do here. We heal. They're weapons," Felix said quietly. "Designed to kill us. They're patients. She met his eyes across the room. Scared, injured patients who didn't ask to be born into a war. Through the night, she maintained her vigil. The sandstorm arrived with a roar, turning the world outside into a howling chaos of sand and wind. Inside the isolation ward, 3 small dragons slept fitfully, their bodies slowly responding to treatment. The bronze one twitched in its sleep, small puffs of smoke escaping its nostrils. Dreaming, perhaps, of the war nursery where it had spent its short life learning to hate. Sienna sat in a chair between the treatment beds, her own exhaustion finally catching up with her. Her eyes drifted closed, but not before she noticed something that made her pause. The violet dragon, the smallest one, had shifted in its sleep. It had moved closer to the edge of its bed, toward where she sat. One small clawed foot extended out from under its blanket, barely touching the armrest of her chair. It was such a tiny gesture. Barely noticeable. But in that moment, Sienna understood that something had begun. Something that neither species had planned for or wanted. Outside, the storm raged on, burying the crashed ship under tons of sand, erasing the evidence of the accident that had brought them together. By morning, the Dravok Empire would notice the missing transport. By afternoon, they would be demanding answers. But for now, in this small bubble of safety carved out of the hostile desert night, a human and 3 dragons shared the same quiet space. And that, Sienna thought as sleep finally claimed her, was a kind of miracle all its own. The morning sun painted the medical station in shades of orange and gold, the sandstorm having passed during the night like a bad dream. Sienna woke with a stiff neck, still slumped in the chair between the 3 treatment beds. Her first coherent thought was to check the monitors, but something made her pause. The bronze dragon was awake, watching her with those copper eyes. But the hostility from yesterday had softened into something closer to curiosity. When she moved, it didn't hiss or bare its teeth. It simply observed, head tilted slightly to one side. "Good morning," she said quietly, her voice rough from sleep. She stood slowly, joints protesting, and checked the vital signs on each juvenile. The improvement was remarkable. Core temperatures had stabilized. Heart rates had dropped into normal ranges. The 4 bags were nearly empty, which meant their bodies were absorbing the fluids properly. The silver dragon stirred, stretching its wings in a lazy arc before tucking them back. A sound emerged from its throat, not quite a purr but close. The violet one remained asleep, its small chest rising and falling with deep, even breaths. Felix arrived with breakfast and coffee, stopping short when he saw the scene. "They look better," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "Much better. Another day of observation and they should be stable enough to eat solid food." Sienna accepted the coffee gratefully, letting the warmth seep into her hands. "Any word from command?" "That's why I'm here." Felix glanced nervously at the dragons. "Captain Wade wants to see you. Now." Apparently, the Dravok Empire has been flooding all channels with demands about a missing transport carrying valuable cargo. They're sending a diplomatic vessel to Ashara Prime. It arrives in 6 hours. The coffee suddenly tasted bitter. They know the juveniles are here. They know the transport crashed in this sector. They're assuming we have survivors. Felix lowered his voice. Captain Wade wants to hand them over immediately. Avoid an incident. Sienna set down her cup with more force than necessary. These juveniles nearly died. They're still recovering from severe trauma. Moving them now could cause a relapse. I'm just the messenger. Felix held up his hands. But between you and me, I don't think the captain cares about medical concerns. He cares about not starting a war over 3 baby dragons. After Felix left, Sienna stood at the observation window, watching the juveniles through the transparent barrier. The bronze dragon had moved to the edge of its bed, attention focused on where she had been sitting. It made a small chirping sound, almost questioning. She returned to the isolation ward, moving carefully. The bronze dragon's eyes tracked her movement, but instead of aggression, she detected something else. Recognition, maybe. Or the beginning of trust. Your empire wants you back, she told it, knowing it probably understood nothing. They're coming for you today. The dragon tilted its head again, that strangely intelligent gesture. It lifted one clawed foot and placed it deliberately on her hand where it rested on the bed rail. The touch was gentle, exploratory. Testing. Sienna felt her throat tighten. In the war nurseries, these juveniles would have been conditioned to see such contact with humans as the ultimate betrayal. Yet here was this small creature, barely old enough to fly, reaching out despite everything it had been taught. The silver dragon woke fully and immediately noticed the contact between its companion and the human. For a moment, tension filled the air. Then, slowly, it moved closer, sniffing at Sienna's sleeve. Its tongue flicked out, tasting the air around her. Another chirp, this one from the silver dragon, answered by the bronze. What are you saying to each other? Sienna wondered aloud. She spent the morning going through the motions of her duties, but her mind kept returning to the isolation ward. Other patients came and went, colonists with the usual complaints of desert life. Burns, dehydration, equipment injuries. She treated them all with her usual competence, but her heart wasn't in it. Captain Brennan Wade arrived just before noon, his uniform crisp despite the heat. He was a career military officer, the kind who saw everything through the lens of strategic advantage and diplomatic positioning. He studied the juveniles through the observation window with the detached interest of someone evaluating equipment. Impressive specimens, he said. I can see why the Dravok prize them so highly. They're not specimens. They're living beings who barely survived a crash. Sienna crossed her arms. Moving them now is medically inadvisable. Wade turned to face her, his expression neutral. Dr. Cross, I appreciate your dedication to your patients. But these aren't patients in the traditional sense. They're assets of a foreign power, and keeping them here creates a diplomatic situation we cannot afford. They're juveniles who need continued medical supervision. They're weapons in training. Wade's voice remained calm, but firm. Weapons designed specifically to kill humans. Whatever you think you're doing here, whatever connection you believe you're forming, it's based on a misunderstanding of what these creatures are. Before Sienna could respond, an alarm sounded. Felix's voice came over the intercom. Captain Wade, Dr. Cross, you need to see this. They rushed to the isolation ward. Inside, the violet dragon, the smallest one, had woken. But something was wrong. It convulsed on the bed, wings flailing, a high-pitched keening sound emerging from its throat. The monitors showed its heart rate spiking dangerously. Sienna didn't hesitate. She burst through the door, Wade's protests forgotten. The bronze and silver dragons had moved to either side of their distressed companion, making soothing sounds, but the violet dragon seemed beyond comfort. Seizure, Sienna identified quickly, reaching for emergency medication. Probably from the head trauma we missed in initial scans. The violet dragon's eyes rolled back. Its small body went rigid. Sienna administered the anti-seizure medication with steady hands, years of training overriding her fear. The bronze dragon watched her intently, and she could have sworn she saw something like pleading in those copper eyes. Come on, she whispered, her hand gentle on the violet dragon's chest, feeling the frantic heartbeat beneath the scales. Come on, little one. Stay with us. The seizure lasted 40 seconds, though it felt like hours. Gradually, the violet dragon's body relaxed. Its breathing steadied. The monitors showed the medication taking effect, vital signs stabilizing. Sienna sagged with relief. When she looked up, she found the bronze dragon staring at her with an expression she finally recognized. Gratitude. The dragon moved closer, pressing its head against her arm. Not aggressive. Seeking comfort. The silver dragon did the same from the other side. And the violet dragon, exhausted but alive, made a small sound and reached one clawed foot toward her hand. Captain Wade stood in the doorway, his tactical assessment clearly wavering. What just happened? I saved a life. Sienna met his eyes. The same thing I do every day, regardless of species. They're responding to you. Wade's voice held a note of wonder. Dragon juveniles don't respond to humans. They're conditioned from hatching to attack on sight. Maybe the conditioning isn't as absolute as everyone thinks. Sienna gently stroked the bronze dragon's head ridge. Or maybe fear and hatred are learned behaviors, and these juveniles are learning something different. Wade was quiet for a long moment. The Dravok diplomatic vessel arrives in 4 hours. Ambassador Kelris is personally overseeing the transfer. These juveniles are considered property of the Empire. We have no legal basis to refuse their claim. Then we have 4 hours. Sienna looked at the 3 dragons, now huddled together with her in the center. 4 hours to prove that what's happening here matters. The captain left without another word, but Sienna noticed he didn't give a direct order to prepare the juveniles for transfer. It was a small mercy, but she would take it. She spent those precious hours with the dragons, monitoring the violet one's recovery while the other 2 remained close. They were becoming more interactive, responding to her voice, allowing her touch without resistance. The bronze dragon even attempted to mimic a sound she made, resulting in a comical chirp that made her laugh despite the tension. Felix brought food, actual food this time, raw protein supplements designed for carnivorous species. The juveniles ate cautiously at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. They were messy eaters, scraps flying everywhere, and Sienna found herself smiling at their clumsy attempts at dignity. "You're getting attached," Felix observed. "I was attached the moment I pulled them from that wreck." Sienna cleaned a spot of food from the silver dragon's snout. "That's not going to change just because their government wants them back." An hour before the diplomatic vessel's arrival, the bronze dragon did something unexpected. It climbed into Sienna's lap, circling 3 times before settling down with a contented sigh. The silver dragon immediately joined them, draping itself across her feet. The violet dragon, still weak but recovering, watched from its bed before making a small demanding sound. "You want up here too?" Sienna asked, reaching out. The violet dragon didn't wait for a second invitation, scrambling awkwardly into the pile until all 3 juveniles were touching her, their warmth soaking through her clothes. That was how Captain Wade found them when he returned. And more importantly, that was how Ambassador Kelris saw them when the Dravok diplomat arrived for the inspection. Kelris was tall even by Dravok standards, his scales a deep emerald green that spoke of high caste lineage. He wore the formal robes of his station, adorned with medals and honors. His eyes, however, showed nothing but cold calculation. "Captain Wade," Kelris's voice was like gravel rolling down a hill. "I trust the cargo is ready for transfer?" "The juveniles are stable," Wade replied carefully. "Dr. Cross has been providing excellent care." "How fortunate." Kelris's tone suggested he found nothing fortunate about the situation. "Nevertheless, they belong to the Empire. Their training has been interrupted long enough." He moved to the observation window and stopped dead. Whatever he expected to see, it clearly wasn't this. 3 imperial dragons, bred and conditioned for warfare, curled peacefully in the lap of a human medic. The bronze dragon had its head tucked under Sienna's chin. The silver dragon was actually purring, a deep rumbling sound. The violet dragon slept, one small foot resting on her wrist. "Impossible," Kelris breathed. "This is impossible." Sienna looked up, meeting the ambassador's shocked gaze through the window. "They're juveniles," she said simply. "They were scared and hurt. I helped them. This is what happens when you treat living beings with compassion instead of conditioning them for hate." Kelris's expression cycled through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been fear. You have contaminated imperial property. These juveniles are ruined. Their training has been compromised beyond repair. Their training taught them to hate without reason, Sienna replied, her voice steady. What I've shown them is that not all humans are enemies. That's not contamination. That's truth. You understand nothing of our ways. Kelris's hands clenched into fists. These juveniles were destined for greatness. They would have served the Empire with honor. Now they are worthless. They're not worthless. Captain Wade spoke up, surprising everyone. Dr. Cross has demonstrated something remarkable here. Something that could change the entire dynamic between our species. Kelris turned his cold gaze on the captain. You would use this as leverage? As some kind of diplomatic tool? I would use this as proof that the hatred between our people isn't inevitable. Wade gestured toward the isolation ward. Look at them, Ambassador. Really look. Those juveniles chose to trust a human. Despite everything they were taught, despite their conditioning, they made that choice. That has to mean something. The ambassador was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke, his voice carefully controlled. The Empire will not accept this breach of protocol. Those juveniles must be returned immediately for reconditioning. Reconditioning? Sienna stood carefully, the juveniles protesting the movement with small sounds of distress. You mean erasing what they've learned? Forcing them back into hatred? I mean restoring them to their proper function. Kelris met her eyes. Unless you propose an alternative? It was a challenge, and they all knew it. Sienna looked down at the three juveniles, now awake and watching the confrontation with intelligent eyes. The bronze dragon chirped softly, a sound she had come to recognize as questioning. I propose, she said slowly, that you let them choose. The silence that followed Sienna's words felt heavy enough to crush diamonds. Ambassador Kelris stared at her as if she had suggested the twin suns revolve backward. Captain Wade's expression was unreadable, but his hand had moved unconsciously toward his sidearm, a gesture born from years of expecting situations to explode into violence. Let them choose? Kelris's voice dripped with disdain. They are juveniles. Imperial property. They do not get to choose. They're intelligent beings capable of forming attachments and making decisions. Sienna moved forward, the three dragons following her like shadows. The bronze one stayed pressed against her leg, the silver one matching her pace on the other side. The violet dragon, still weak, rode on her shoulder, tiny claws gripping her uniform. You saw what happened in there. That wasn't random behavior. That was trust. That was corruption of military assets. Kelris's tail lashed behind him, a sign of agitation in Dravok body language. What you call trust, I call sabotage. Captain Wade held up a hand. Ambassador, perhaps we should discuss this more calmly. Dr. Cross has raised an interesting point. There is nothing to discuss. Kelris turned his back on them, his robes swirling dramatically. I have authorization from General Horvath himself to retrieve these juveniles. They will be transported back to the war nurseries immediately. Any interference will be considered an act of aggression against the Empire. The bronze dragon's grip on Sienna's leg tightened. A low growl emerged from its throat, smoke wisping from its nostrils. The silver dragon's scales bristled. Even the weakened violet dragon lifted its head, eyes focusing on Kelris with unmistakable hostility. Kelris noticed. His expression shifted from anger to something more complex. They defend you, he said, and for the first time, uncertainty entered his voice. Against their own kind. This is deeper than I thought. It's called bonding, Sienna said quietly. It happens when you actually care for someone instead of using them as weapons. A commotion outside interrupted them. Raised voices, the sound of multiple footsteps. The door burst open and General Horvath himself strode in, his massive frame filling the doorway. He was everything the war stories described, scales black as space, scars crisscrossing his hide like a map of violence. His eyes burned with an intensity that made even Captain Wade take an involuntary step backward. "Where are they?" Horvath's voice was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. "Where are my juveniles?" The three dragons reacted instantly. The bronze and silver ones placed themselves between Sienna and the general, wings spread in defensive postures despite their small size. The violet dragon buried its face in Sienna's neck, trembling. Horvath stopped as if he had hit a physical wall. His eyes widened, the burning intensity flickering with something that looked almost like pain. "What have you done?" The question was directed at Sienna, but his gaze remained fixed on the juveniles. "What have you done to them?" "I saved their lives," Sienna replied, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the primal fear that urged her to run. "They were dying when I found them. Dehydration, thermal shock, internal injuries. Without immediate treatment, they wouldn't have survived the night. And in return for saving them, you poisoned their purpose." Horvath took a step forward. The bronze dragon snarled, a sound far too fierce for something so small. "You have destroyed years of careful conditioning. These juveniles were bred from champion bloodlines. They were destined to lead flights into battle. Now look at them. Cowering behind a human." "They're not cowering," Captain Wade interjected. "They're protecting. There's a difference." Horvath's attention shifted to the captain. "You defend this?" "I defend the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we've been doing this all wrong." Wade gestured to the dragons. "Look at them, General. Really look. They're healthy, responsive, and clearly capable of complex emotional attachments. Attachments they chose to form despite everything they were taught. That's not weakness. That's strength. That's treason to their nature." But Horvath's voice had lost some of its certainty. He moved slowly, carefully, until he was close enough to study the juveniles properly. The bronze dragon didn't back down, maintaining its protective stance. "You," Horvath addressed it directly, "do you remember the war nursery? The lessons? The purpose you were given?" The bronze dragon tilted its head, those copper eyes intelligent and focused. It made a series of chirps and whistles, sounds that clearly carried meaning even if Sienna couldn't translate them. Horvath's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly to identify. "It says," he translated, his voice oddly flat, "that it remembers the fear. The constant hunger. The cold. The images of humans that haunted its dreams. It says the nursery taught it to hate. But this human taught it to heal." Ambassador Kelris made a sound of protest. "General, you cannot possibly believe this display. They are juveniles. They do not understand what they are saying." "I understand dragon speech better than anyone in this sector," Horvath replied without looking away from the bronze dragon. "And I understand what I'm hearing. These juveniles are expressing concepts they should not yet possess. Gratitude. Loyalty. Trust." He paused. "Love." The word hung in the air like a challenge to everything the Dravok Empire had built its military doctrine upon. Sienna felt the violet dragon's heartbeat against her neck, fast but steady. The bronze and silver dragons remained in their protective positions, ready to defend despite knowing they stood no chance against a warrior of Horvath's caliber. "Perhaps," Captain Wade said carefully, "we're asking the wrong questions. Instead of focusing on what's been lost, maybe we should consider what's been gained." "Gained?" Kelris's voice rose. "We have gained nothing but compromised assets and a diplomatic nightmare. We've gained proof that coexistence is possible." Wade moved to stand beside Sienna, a gesture of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed. "These juveniles have shown that the hatred between our species isn't genetic or inevitable. It's taught. And if it can be taught, it can be untaught. General Horvath was quiet for a long moment, his scarred face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. In the war nursery where these three were raised, there is a phrase we repeat to every hatchling. Fire recognizes no friend. We teach them that their flames should burn all enemies equally, that mercy is weakness, that attachment to other species is betrayal. He reached out slowly, and the bronze dragon tensed but didn't retreat. Horvath's massive claw hovered inches from the juvenile's head. But fire also recognizes warmth. And these juveniles have found warmth where we taught them to expect only cold. General, Kelris began, alarm clear in his voice. Be silent, ambassador. Horvath's command was absolute. I raised these juveniles from eggs. I personally selected their genetic lines. I oversaw every moment of their conditioning. And in all that time, I never once saw them content. They were weapons in training, yes. Effective, yes. But never happy. Never at peace. His claw finally made contact, gently touching the bronze dragon's head. The juvenile leaned into the touch, a sound of contentment emerging. They are at peace now. This is unacceptable, Kelris insisted. The Empire has protocols. We cannot simply abandon centuries of tradition because one human showed temporary kindness. No, Horvath agreed. We cannot abandon tradition lightly. But neither can we ignore evidence when it presents itself so clearly. He straightened to his full height, and suddenly he looked less like a warrior and more like someone carrying an impossible weight. These juveniles will not return to the war nursery. The declaration sent shock waves through the room. Kelris sputtered protests. Captain Wade looked cautiously hopeful. Sienna felt the dragons press closer to her, as if they understood the significance even if they couldn't follow all the words. General, you cannot make this decision unilaterally, Kelris argued. The High Command will never approve. Then they can court-martial me. Horvath's eyes burned with renewed intensity, but now it was directed inward, at some decision he had wrestled with and finally made. I have sent enough juveniles to die for the Empire's pride. I have conditioned enough hatchlings to hate without understanding why. If these three have found something beyond that cycle, I will not be the one to take it from them. He looked at Sienna directly. You have created something unprecedented, human. A bond that should not exist according to everything we know. The question now is what you intend to do with it. Sienna swallowed hard, feeling the weight of 3 small lives depending on her answer. I intend to keep caring for them. To show them that the universe is bigger than war and hatred. To give them the choice to become something more than weapons. Noble words. Horvath's tone was neutral, neither mocking nor encouraging. But words are simple compared to the reality of raising dragons. They will grow. Their needs will become more complex. Their powers will develop. Fire, flight, the hunting instinct. Can you handle that? Can your species? I don't know, Sienna admitted. But I'd rather try and fail than not try at all. The bronze dragon chirped agreement, looking up at her with those trusting copper eyes. The silver dragon rubbed its head against her leg. The violet dragon, gathering strength, nuzzled her cheek. Captain Wade cleared his throat. If I may suggest a compromise. What if we established a trial program? These 3 juveniles remain under Dr. Cross's care, but with oversight from both Terran and Dravok observers. We document everything. We learn from this. And if it works, we have a model for future cooperation. And if it fails? Kelris demanded. Then we have learned something valuable about the limits of cross-species bonding, Wade replied. Either way, the knowledge gained is worth the risk. Horvath considered this, his tail swishing slowly behind him. The High Command will hate this. The war nursery overseers will call it heresy. But I have not risen to my position by making only comfortable decisions. He fixed Sienna with a stare that seemed to see through her. If you fail, if these juveniles suffer because of your attachment or inability to properly care for them, I will hold you personally responsible. Is that clear? Crystal clear. Sienna's voice didn't waver. Then they are yours. For now. Horvath turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. The bronze one, the leader. Its name is Rykken. The silver is Talis. The violet is Venna. They earned those names in the war nursery. They may choose to keep them or select new ones, but they should know where they came from. He left without another word, his massive frame disappearing through the door. Ambassador Kelris followed, still protesting, his voice fading into the distance. Captain Wade lingered. You understand what you've just taken on? He asked quietly. I'm starting to. Sienna looked down at the 3 dragons, now relaxed and content. But I meant what I said. They deserve the chance to choose their own path. Wade nodded slowly. I'll arrange for the necessary facilities. Expanded living quarters, proper nutrition, safety protocols. This is going to attract attention from both sides. Some of it will be positive. Much of it won't be. I know. After Wade left, Sienna finally allowed herself to breathe fully. She sank down to the floor, and the 3 dragons immediately swarmed over her. Rykken claimed her lap, Talis sprawled across her legs, and Venna perched on her shoulder. They were warm, solid, undeniably real. So, she said to them, what do we do now? Rykken chirped, a sound that somehow conveyed contentment and mischief in equal measure. Talis yawned, displaying rows of tiny teeth. Venna nuzzled closer, already drifting towards sleep. That night, Sienna set up a makeshift nest in her quarters, using thermal blankets and padding to create a comfortable space. She expected the dragons to claim it immediately. Instead, they climbed onto her bed, circling 3 times before settling into a heap against her side. This is highly irregular, she told them, even as she adjusted the blankets to cover all of them. Patients don't usually sleep with their doctors. Rykken made a sound that was almost like a laugh. Talis was already snoring softly. Venna's breathing had evened out into sleep. Sienna lay awake for a while, feeling the weight and warmth of 3 lives she had somehow become responsible for. Outside, the desert of Ashara Prime stretched away into darkness, hostile and unforgiving. Inside, in this small space carved out of determination and compassion, something new was taking root. The war between Terran and Dravok would not end because of 3 juveniles and 1 medic. Treaties would not be signed. Centuries of hatred would not evaporate overnight. But maybe, just maybe, a crack had formed in the wall that separated their species. A crack small enough to fit 3 dragons and 1 human with the audacity to believe in something better. As sleep finally claimed her, Sienna's last conscious thought was of Horvath's words. Fire recognizes warmth. And in recognizing it, perhaps it could choose to illuminate rather than destroy. In the darkness, 3 pairs of eyes opened briefly, reflecting the dim emergency lights. Rykken shifted closer, head resting over Sienna's heart. Talis stretched, wing draping protectively across them all. Venna made a small sound of contentment. They slept that way, tangled together, boundaries blurred. Dragon and human. Enemy and friend. Past and future meeting in the present moment. And for that one night, at least, hate had no place to root. There was only trust, earned slowly and given freely. There was only the warmth of connection that transcended species and conditioning. There was only, finally, peace. The galaxy would learn of this eventually. Stories would be told. Some would call it miracle, others madness. But those who saw it with their own eyes, who witnessed 3 dragons choosing love over hate, would know the truth. Sometimes the bravest act is not fighting. Sometimes it is simply opening your heart and seeing what grows there. And sometimes, just sometimes, what grows is extraordinary.